So, as we all know, so much has changed in this crazy world that we are living in. And in the design and architecture community, there have been many shifts. This topic is literally another set of challenges that requires new thinking. Get ready to explore this multi-generational design topic with an amazing set of panelists. And moderator Avinash Rajagopal wasn't originally scheduled to moderate this panel, but he offered to fill in, so we are so incredibly grateful for him. And he ran a panel this morning on responsible design, and I know this is going to be another great topic for him. Avi is the editor-in-chief of Metropolis, the award-winning architecture and design publication. He is a frequent speaker and moderator at events, like today, related to interior design, architecture, and urbanism. And he is an advocate for sustainable architecture and design. Avi, welcome to the stage, and I'll let you introduce the rest of the panel.
Come on on, folks. I'll introduce you when you're here. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's so fantastic to see everybody here. Is everybody having a good show? Awesome, awesome. I'm going to introduce the panelists to you, but before I do that, I'd love to introduce you to the panelists. So can we have a show of hands here? How many folks here are interior designers? OK, great. How many folks are in building, construction, developing? On the building side. Oh, awesome. OK. Product manufacturing, and then marketing and all of that stuff. OK. Dealers, contractors. OK. All right. So we know who's in the audience. That's great. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a fantastic panel today to talk about multi-generational design. I mean, people of all generations living together, this is not new. It's certainly not new for many families in the US. But the pandemic, I think, has accelerated certain trends, right? So over the past couple of years, we've seen some kids move back with their parents for financial reasons. We've seen parents move in with their kids or developing homes together where they can all live together for safety reasons, for a whole variety of familial reasons. We've also seen a shrink in generational wealth transfer. So unfortunately, we haven't seen as much wealth transfer from baby boomers to millennials, and millennials now should be in their prime home building or home buying age, and we know how that's going. I'm a millennial, so I can say that. And the other thing is that we're also seeing movements for accessory units, granny units, ADUs, as they're called in some parts of the country. And that's another form of multi-generational living, right? So we've seen all these trends accelerate, and they bring some really interesting design challenges, but I think it's going to be a reality, this typology, for anybody who's in the residential design sector, and I assume a lot of you are. So we have a great group of panelists to discuss this topic with us today. We have with us Jonas Karnemark, who is the president of Karnemark, joining us from DC today.
That's right. Thanks
so much, Jonas, for joining us. We also have Anne Rue, who is the owner and principal designer at Anne Rue Interiors, who's from right here in Florida. Thanks, Anne, for joining us. And Kendall Ansel, who's a principal at Kendall Ansel Interiors, joining us all the way from Vancouver, Canada. Kendall, thanks so much for joining us. So let's start off with, I'd love for each of you to give us a small introduction to the kind of work you do. I know you have some projects you'd like to show us. So give us a taste of what multi-generational design feels like today. And I'm going to have you kick us off, Jonas.
Well, thank you. So I have a design build firm where we do architecture and construction in DC, and we've been doing that 35 years next week. And then I have 2 showrooms that are kitchen and bath for European product. And there I get to work with other interior designers, architects, and it's really fun to learn what other people do. But in our business, we've always looked at whole house renovation in terms of creating a home that lasts generationally. And when I was doing this earlier, the boomers, which I'm one, were sort of like they just wanted to have what they wanted to have. They didn't really care about, it's feet first, that's when I'm leaving. And what I've really seen now is millennials are coming to us and asking for a forever home. They're saying, I want to have grab bars, I want an elevator, I at least want space for one. And it's such a shift from what we're doing, what we used to do. But I think of it more as, grandkids to grandparents, everybody should be able to use the home. And I think that's somewhat of a European concept in the sense that people were investing in a house that is going to be longer than them. And I've seen that happen with a pandemic. People care about quality and things like that.
Absolutely.
You want me to show?
Yeah,
pictures
the
now?
green.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So these are a couple shots. This was actually a client that we did their kitchen back in the 80s, and then he developed mobility issues, so we did a accessible bathroom, and that's the shower in the accessible bathroom. And for them, it was creating a first floor living space for him. He had arm strength and really loved a tub, and so we created a tub where he could slide in. But most people feel that it wasn't sort of a ADA style bathroom. It was a lot of fun, and we combined two bathrooms where we then took a little powder room and used actually the vanity top that I put back in the 80s back into the little powder room that we created. This is another one where another retiring gentleman wanted a really nice luxury sort of spa bathroom. That's the pictures on the left and the middle. And he had his mother move in, and we did a very accessible bathroom for her. But his was accessible shower. We had blocking in the walls for future grab bars and things like good lighting, contrast, that type of thing, which is really important. This was another one where the parents who actually went down to Florida and then wanted to be with their kids some time of the year, but they didn't want to disturb the teenagers and things like that, so we put a little elevator in the foyer, and because it was this nice Tudor home, we used a little circular tube so that we didn't have to frame out some big box. And they could get in there, nip up with their little dog up to what we called the Peninsula Suite upstairs, and so they had a really nice kitchenette, bathroom, and things like that, so it was like a little attic renovation. That's the little place where they live. And then because the younger kids were doing all this work with for their parents, they wanted to upgrade their master bath. So that's the one on the right where we updated that. And that's been a really popular shot, even though it's such a small bathroom. But it was just sort of, for them, they felt really good about it. And they knew, I think, that at some point they were going to move upstairs themselves.
Oh, it's me.
Yeah.
That's the thing about aging, right? I mean, it happens to all of us.
It does.
And that's I think the design lesson that's sinking in is, if you want durable spaces, if you want that investment over the years, as you were saying, you need to be able to, the spaces that your parents might use today are the things you might be using right down the line. The other interesting thing, I think, just to emphasize from the project you showed us, Jonas, is this integration of like different design aesthetics, sensibilities, with a real kind of attention to what each generation needs. And I'm sure, and we're going to dive into that a little bit more in our discussion, but when you were talking about high contrast and light, right? So it goes beyond material choices. It's really thinking about the big picture when you're designing for people of different ages. So beautiful projects.
One thing that I find is that if you can do something where design is enduring and lasts a long time, it's a much more sustainable approach to doing a home because it will last over generations.
Right, and sustainable in many senses of the word. So we're going to dig into that. Kendall, let's have you talk about your work.
Sure. So my name is Kendall Ansel, and I own two businesses. I have a 12-year-old interior design business and a 3-year-old construction company where we focus on growing and working with female trades, and based in Vancouver. But I have done work also in Baltimore and Montreal, so been a few different places. We mainly focus on renovations, and I think the majority of our clients, are boomers that are looking to help their kids get into the housing market and provide either a larger home for them or an apartment that they can use and their kids can use. We also have a lot of younger clientele that are just starting out in their first place, and they don't really know how to navigate that process of making the space feel like theirs. when they're buying into, bigger developments with very cookie cutter design. So that's kind of us in a nutshell.
Yeah.
These photos are out of order, but we will. Do I press the button?
Yes. Green.
Oh,
It's not going up there.
Oh. So they're coming up here. Okay.
Okay.
They're up there, so that's fine.
yes. So we can ignore the one on the left because that's definitely not the house. That's a before photo of something else. But the one on the right, it was Grandma's house. She had lived there 30, 35 years, and it was quite dated. So the grandson actually moved in and now has a baby, and they are living in this grandma's old apartment. This is the kitchen. So a lot of times we're talking to people about budgets and what they can do to upgrade the home, but not necessarily changing everything. We don't want to be removing drywall everywhere. We want to stretch the budget as best we can to give them the most that we can. So for example, in this one, you can see that we still have some 6-panel doors in the background. We didn't change the doors. They were in great shape, but we updated the kitchen, removed a wall, and did a few other upgrades to the apartment. Oh, went too fast. So this is
Nice.
actually, it was a new apartment, new build, and it had no character and no personality. The client actually thought the windows were coming in black and they came in white. So we swapped the dining room and living room areas. We added the black to the windows. We basically overhauled the space to make it more personal for them because it just felt just very cavernous and had no personality, not much going on. These people also downsized from a very large home to an apartment, and that's something that is a very emotional process, and it's something that we help our clients navigate through. So as much storage as we can cram into these places, we do attempt to. So the entire fireplace there actually opens up to full storage. There's another shot in a different direction. Again, they have pieces like the piano that they want to bring to the apartment from the large home, and we have to attempt to make it work in a smaller space. So this lady, I think she's 81 now. Her whole life has dreamed about having a very contemporary kitchen. I'm hoping we have a sneak of a before photo in here. But her son lives in the basement, and she lives on the main level, and oh, we've lost it. Oh, that's you. That's not me. So we completely gutted her apartment and created more of a contemporary space for her dream space. She intends to live out her years there. Her son, like I said, lives in the basement and looks after her from there. So it's quite a nice place. Thanks, George.
I think, Kendall, one of the thing you mentioned about being responsible with the budget, because a lot of folks who are making decisions like this to live with their parents or with their kids are often doing that also to make a financially responsible decision, whether it is, with a view to their own sort of retirement savings or their kind of future planning, or it is to do with their kids' finances, right? And so I think that financial angle is really interesting too. Is there's design constraints, and those constraints come from you have to make creative decisions with the budget.
You
right?
do, and they want to feel that the money has really been used as best as possible and not focused on one area. That, at least for our clientele, we're always trying to make the most of what we have. So there's a lot of clever ways to do that.
Right, absolutely. And you want to take us through some of your work?
Sure. My name is Ann Rue, and I'm an interior designer here in Florida. I've been in business for 21 years. We specialize in residential, multifamily, and we do a good amount of senior housing, independent, assisted, and memory care facilities. I think I just pushed this right here.
Green, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so in Florida, multi-generational has been around for a very long time. The Hispanic community, the Latino community, they're all coming and they need more space because they all live together, or they don't ship grandma off to the nursing home or to the villages. They live with them. So, but now it's happening all over, especially with COVID. People are coming to live together. So these projects that I'm going to share with you are new construction build, and it's basically taking a home that you might have a 2-car garage over here and a 1-car garage over here. We convert that 1-car garage into a complete living space for grandma or the nanny or the college student that comes back. So again, it looks like a normal size house. We're not reinventing the wheel here, but they've got their own entry. They have their own living space, which you can see right here. Oh, you guys can't see that. How do I get there? Oh,
Yeah, you're good. Oh,
We can see it here.
oh, they can see
No
it.
worries.
Perfect. Okay. So anyway, this is a living space where the kitchenette area is somewhat private from the living space, and then beyond that is the bedroom, which I think is right here. So again, it's kind of like an apartment style living, but they have a full kitchenette. They have their own entry, and it really makes a space specifically for them. This next space that I'm going to share with you is more of an open concept. Exact same type of layout for the home, where one side of the house, which would be like a single car garage, is converted into a living space. But this is a much more open plan. You can see the living room and the kitchenette area are more open. It was able to give us a larger space for the kitchenette, and then beyond that is the bathroom and then the bedroom. So there you go.
That's fantastic, right? So that's another completely different kind of strategy, is taking over spaces that are underused or that can be, kind of made over to accommodate new inhabitants in the family. But what's lovely about it is that you've created practically autonomous spaces, right?
Yes.
Because I think that's another thing. That's maybe a difference. Again, I can say this, I'm South Asian, we, just like, Latino folks, we're used to the idea of, kids living with their parents and so on. But I think this idea of autonomy, right? The parents need to have their own space. The kids need to have their own space. That's new. And I think what you're doing is creating that kind of bridge with this new lifestyle, which is really fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, they want to have their own entrance, but they also want to be able to enjoy the rest of the house. So then it's very easy for them to be able to go right into where the family is and where the bigger kitchen is in the family room. So it's important.
Right. So you can have the best of both worlds. That's
Absolutely.
fantastic. So one thread I want to pull out from all of your projects, and we're going to open up to questions from all of you in a little bit. So if you have any thoughts about multi-generational design, designing for people of different ages, how to deal with budgets or design sensibilities or anything like that on that, please start to think about it. I don't need questions. They can be half-formed thoughts. You have a response to something you saw, you loved a project you just saw, tell us about it. We want to pull you into this conversation. But folks, tell me, how do you bridge design sensibilities, right? Because often people have very different preferences about how they'd like to live, and they're not always expected. I love the fact that you had a client in their 80s who've always wanted a contemporary kitchen, right? And often you find younger folks who want transitional style or, really classic or farmhouse. I think our assumptions about aesthetics are often wrong, and that maybe was where some of the previous generation of senior living spaces maybe failed, is that they assumed that older people had conservative tastes.
They don't.
So let's talk about design sensibilities across generations. What have you learned? How do you bridge it? How do you have that conversation with your clients?
For me, again, more of that modern or contemporary or transitional look is where the younger generation and the older generation is moving. Like you just said, in senior housing, no more are we doing the traditional look. It's just not there. Also, that more contemporary or transitional look, it's just a cleaner feel. It's got more longevity, and it's got more of a timeless feel.
Yeah.
Right.
I would say that mom and dad have now become part of the conversation of what the kids want to do if they're all living together. So instead of having husband and wife opinion, now we have husband, wife, grandma, mom. Like it's become, we have a bigger discussion of how this house is actually going to work and function. So we have a lot more opinions. It takes a lot more patience, but
Therapy.
a lot more therapy. But yeah, it's mom will always have an opinion, but it's really about figuring out individually what they want and trying to make the ties together with, you know, colors and materials and look, so that there isn't this break in. It's clearly grandma's apartment, it's clearly mom and dad's, and then it's the kids. The house does have to have some continuity to it.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen a real rise in contemporary in our area. I'm in Washington, D.C. and Virginia, and when I started it was a lot of moldings and very traditional, but I think with the advent of the internet and shows like Mad Men and all that, the whole mid-century thing has grown, and that's a very easy palette to bring across both generations because it's familiar to older people and younger kids like it. Sometimes we break the argument with what's sympathetic to the home already so that it feels and flows nicely. And I think flow is probably the first thing that you want to focus on amongst all the spaces and how it works within the house. And then you can dress it up. And I always think dressing it up with art is one of the best ways to dress up a house. And that lends a personality for both the adults and the kids, or, well, they're all adults, but all the generational people in there.
Yeah, and we certainly saw that with that elevator shaft that you put into the Tudor home. I mean, you know, really thinking about how the space flows, what's going to block the flow of the space. I mean, it was absolutely clear in there, Jonas.
It's beautiful.
Well, we didn't want a box in the foyer. We just wanted this nice little tube.
It's very cool.
I want to continue on this theme that Jonas has opened up. What are some of the things that you have to think about when you're designing a multi-generational space? You brought up flow. We've talked about color before. We talked about light before. You know, what are some of the things that, like, maybe the kids haven't really thought about because they don't really think about, you know, well, is there color contrast so, you know, somebody who's aging is able to see things clearly? Or maybe the older folks haven't really thought about, well, if the kids want to entertain, what would they want their friends to see? You know, so like, what are some of the things across generations that you often have to have those difficult, maybe, conversations with your clients about?
Well, I think for us, I've really been impressed with how much the younger generations are thinking about those things. And I think part of that is just the education that they've been getting from all the different venues and thinking about things like, can the house sustain grab bars later? Or is there a barrier-free shower? Pretty much any shower we do now, we just do that because it's good building. And I think that sort of happened with sustainability and green building. There was that big blip in eco-chic in 2008 where everybody wanted to go green, but now it's just people are expecting a better performing house. And I think if we keep going with this, people will expect a better generational house.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I'll add on to grab bars, to bidet seats, to smart technology, and then also material choices like a vinyl flooring versus maybe a traditional hardwood, just so that we get more longevity for potentially walker or a wheelchair, and talking about, you know, the mobility issues that could come in the future, obviously being very sensitive to when we bring up a topic like that. But when I describe the longevity of products, people are automatically bought in because they want to see their homes last longer and be in better shape longer.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go back to form and function. You really have to understand how they want to live in their home, and we need to have open spaces for everyone to gather. But what's more important is everyone has their own space and their smaller spaces. And these don't have to be huge spaces. I mean, just a little nook.
A cubby, yeah.
Yeah. It makes such a huge difference. So you got to understand how they're going to function and how they can get away from everyone when they don't want to be with them, and then also gather when they do.
Yeah.
I love that, you know, this designing for multi-generational living is such an amazing creative challenge because it really forces you to think about balance, right? To think about the relationships between spaces in a way that maybe you won't have to think about when you're just dealing with husband and wife and two different personalities. It's really interesting. I think it's such a more complex form of design, but ultimately so much more satisfying. You brought up the green building movement, and we talked earlier about how designing multi-generational homes is also a way of future-proofing. Like, you want the home to last for a long time, you want it to be a good space for the people who are in it. Can we talk about how much sustainability, but also health, wellness, those kinds of concepts are starting to play into your work? Before you answer that, quick reminder, we're going to come to you for any of your thoughts and comments in just a minute here, but I'm going to let the panelists respond to that.
Well, I can start with that, and it's the younger generation that's really conscious of this, I believe. And I spoke about it yesterday. There are a lot of man-made countertops and surfaces that function for specific reasons, but I think a lot of people are looking more to the natural stone, the marbles, the granite, the quartzite, because of the fact that 10 years from now, 12 years from now, when we're ripping that cabinet out, where does it go? Does it get crushed up, and is it used as pavement? Is it used as landscaping? The man-made products, do they just sit in a landfill? How do you do that? Where do they go? So people are thinking about that. Those natural stones might cost more, but it's worth it in the long run.
Absolutely. Let's wait till they announce. Okay. As I said it, the announcement ended.
Unfortunately, I think sometimes sustainability and budget have a dance together that they have to do, for us anyways. And I'm definitely just back to more of the warranty and the longevity of what's initially being put in is what we can offer, I would say, to someone that's on a budget. And then, we're constantly pulling things out that are basically brand new that we'll bring to a store to resell, or it can go on Facebook Marketplace to be sold, and really trying to make that effort. I think that myself owning a construction company, we make that effort every day, and the clients enjoy seeing the care being put into what is being put into the landfill.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that. I think for us, the sustainability thing has been about better building and energy. Mm-hmm. And there's so much low-hanging fruit that you can, teach your clients about in terms of how to make the house perform better. And it isn't just about recycled glass countertops. That's sort of, that's cool. But there's so much else that one can do if you want to really think about sustainability that way. I saw this morning a really cool thing, which was a rain shower that recycled the water so you could have a really powerful shower for a long time. And it reminded me of taking a bath. You're in the bathtub and you're not wasting water. Some of the other things is if you're demolishing something, we've been doing this for years, where there's a local community place called Community Forklift, and they will pick up everything that's building materials, flooring, appliances, cabinets, toilets, faucets, and you think, oh, this is no good, no one's going to want this, but they take it all and it goes into a lower income reuse stream, and that way the clients get a kickback from taxes, and then we're not filling up the landfill. And that's just standard on demo drawings when we pull stuff out.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. I'll just emphasize that a minute, because that's near and dear to my heart too. If you're working on renovation projects, as you said, you want to look for a regional salvage partner or a nonprofit who will take demolition waste or building material waste. I believe we had a panelist this morning from Refined Kitchens, which works out of San Diego, California, and he was saying that building materials, often a nonprofit will be able to give your client a tax break of up to $5,000. And if you actually take the extra step of appraising it, it can be an even bigger tax break than that. So there's value in materials that are being thrown away, and especially on renovation projects or projects where an older generation client is now redoing their space up again to bring their kids in, or kids are adding to their space to bring their parents in. There's going to be churn of materials, and you want to be responsible with the use of those materials. So that's definitely a big factor here. Before we open up to questions from the audience, just one quick thing. So what to you feels like a successful outcome for multi-generational design? when you're thinking about a space where multiple generations are going to live together, what is it that you're like, if I get to that point, if I hit that, I'm happy? So I'm just going to get something a little more personal from all of you, and then we'll open up for questions.
So I think it's in the future, because if that home turns over to another family and they can use it for that same purpose, that's when it's really fun. And we've been doing this for a while, where we've seen homes turn over and then we go back and maybe remodel the home for a new client. But when that flow is right, then it's just so sellable. It's wonderful that way.
Yeah, or future generations can be welcomed into that home, and it can be converted, and they move through the home organically. I think that's probably the key to success of that.
Absolutely.
It's when I get a thank you letter or an invite to come over and have a glass of wine, then I know I've done a good job.
Well, you just managed expectations somehow.
Absolutely. We're ready for any thoughts, comments, questions, responses from all of you. All I will say is, if you're going to say something, we do have a mic for you, so that everybody can hear. Any questions or thoughts, comments?
You have to offer a prize for the first one.
Sorry?
You offer a prize for the first question.
Oh, well,
Considering it.
yeah, I'm wondering what prize. Well,
You don't really have to give one.
I know. Oh, I just offer one. I do have digital editions of Metropolis if anybody wants one. First question, I'm serious.
Any projects that you guys are working on that are similar to this, where it's co-generational?
Any designers out there doing it?
Yeah?
Go ahead.
Very nice.
Yeah, you are.
Where are you located? I'm doing a project there right now. Good for you.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I'm going to have a mic come to you. Sorry.
I'll touch it if you don't mind.
You mentioned in the beginning something about accessory dwelling units, ADUs, and I've heard that come up at this show more than once. And I wonder if the panelists have come up against zoning regulations and problems if you've been associated with creating an unconventional design for a house that has multiple living spaces, multiple kitchens on one single family lot.
Uh-huh. And that sounds like a question for you.
Well, I was going to let the construction people do that, but yes, there is, especially if you're trying to put two kitchens. And we're doing it right now at the beach, where she wants almost like a full kitchen below, and then a full kitchen up top, plus a working pantry, and they're saying no, too much. So, again,
Sometimes that's if you have two cooktops, like in a basement, they won't let that other cooktop go. And then there's regional things. There's a county near us called Arlington, where they have been promoting ADUs. They also promote sustainability. We won a green award for one project there. And it's really interesting that they'll give you a tax break if you create an ADU, so that you can have more dense population within that area. So check out, it's really about the codes and who's pushing that.
Yeah. California is doing something similar in many counties, where they're trying to incentivize ADUs.
Yeah.
Because they want to build density.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, comments, questions? I think one of the interesting things about co-generational living is that it also, I think, takes some of the pressure off of that huge wave we saw of senior living spaces coming online in cities everywhere. So I just wonder if, are there design cues or lessons that you've learned from co-generational living that you think are also applicable to senior living? We talked about aesthetics for a second, but just what are the things you've learned about aging in place through your process?
Ease of use of the space. Is it a walker? Is it a wheelchair? Is it grab bars? Just knowing what needs could be met in that space. And then obviously with kitchens, it's about how to move around and not hurt yourself in that space.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely ease of use is the biggest. the biggest thing I've learned.
And getting rid of the hallways. I mean, you need to have dividers, but you have to have open spaces. The hallways are just so hard to navigate, especially if you have a wheelchair and things like that. And then the zero entry showers.
Yeah.
I don't know why we do it any differently.
And there's lots of things like that, but I think it comes back to better building. I mean, having an outlet behind a toilet, they don't have to have a smart toilet now, but you can have it later. Having wider doorways that are easily accessible, having light switches that have a little light on them so you can see them. And think about night lighting in terms of guiding yourself, because as you get older, you might get up a little more often.
There's some new products actually that came out at CES for moving doors that automatically open. There's a new hospital building in Vancouver that actually the person waves at the door and it opens. So there's a lot new tech that can actually help with all these aging in place issues, such as doors and, flow.
Right? Yeah. I think those elements of transitional design, again, as a reminder, they're honestly, a grab bar is great for everybody in a bathroom.
It's like a seatbelt. You
It's
never
like
know
a
when you.
seatbelt. Yeah, you never know. I mean, you never know when you're when you might slip, and you might need it. And there's lots of things like that. Lighting at night or
the
hallways.
manufacturers have really stepped up the game because it does not look like handicapped. Or
They're not
anything.
ugly anymore.
Yeah, it's really wonderful how they've really helped out with that.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing I wanted to round out here is, for a long time, we looked at ADA regulations as like just that, regulations, like a baseline that we need to meet. But I think hearing you talk, especially your first project, Jonas, where, there was somebody with limited mobility. We're also talking about, people with different sensory needs, people who see things differently, who hear differently. Certainly, I think co-generational design also shows us the way forward in terms of thinking about ADA not as a baseline, but as a creative opportunity. So I'm wondering if you can just talk about that for a second, and then we'll close out today.
Oh.
Well, one thing, if you want to learn more about it, there's the Living in Place Institute that has a certification called CLIP, Certified Living in Place Specialist. And that is really helpful in terms of learning tips and tricks on how to get your client nice things that will be protective of them, but in a way that's more ageless. It's much more about what if you sprained your ankle one day? You still have the same issues as when you have a walker.
Well, I think in one of your pictures, you designed it beautifully there. I mean, the space didn't look like it was ADA. It looked beautiful. So, I mean, again, our home is the most expensive thing we're ever going to purchase. Let's make it look good while we do it. Let's make it function and let's make it look beautiful.
Yeah. I would say like one of the most obvious things is countertop heights and wall-mounted toilets. Those are the easiest ways to customize a space that is future-proof for yourself and for your needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a great discussion. Thank you so much. I love that we've talked about some of those big trends, but also touched upon some really great design tips. Little details that make such a big difference. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you all of you for being part of this discussion. We really appreciate it. We got a resource mention here, LIPS, the Living in Place, certification. So please check that out. And of course, if you want to connect with any of the panelists after we step off the stage, please feel free to do so. I hope all of you have a great show and a great afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you. Great job.
Welcome to another episode of Meet the Maker. I'm Jennifer Pfaff-Smith, and I'm the Naples, Palm Beach, and Miami homes editor at Luxe Interiors and Design magazine. As part of Black History Month, Luxe is speaking with artisans whose work examines themes of Black history and culture. Today, I have the honor of speaking with an incredible Fort Myers artist. You might have seen his work over his 30-year career, or perhaps watched his special on Amazon Prime titled Marcus Jansen, Examine and Report. But for those who haven't, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Marcus Jansen. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jennifer. It's my pleasure.
Great. So for viewers who have not had the pleasure of seeing your work, just to provide a little background info, you paint these surreal landscapes and portraits that examine themes like conflict and casualties. And, I understand a lot of your work tends to touch on experiences that you've had growing up. And you were raised in the Bronx in the 1960s, which was a pretty tumultuous time. And then you moved to this small town in Germany. So these polar opposite experiences. And I would love to hear just more about, what from your memories and your time growing up really stuck with you that left an impact on you as an artist.
You mean in both places? Yeah, it's you couldn't be more paradox in terms of different places, right? I mean, my mother's side of the family is from Jamaica, so we immigrated to Jamaica in 1954. And this was when this huge wave of Jamaicans came into the United States. And a lot of them migrated to the Bronx. And the Bronx was just one of those places where a lot of people, especially from the islands, came in. And we lived in an apartment building, fairly new apartment building that was built in 1964. This was a time when, King was shot in 68, which was only 2 months before I was born. And there was just a lot going on, generally speaking. Race relations were very difficult in New York City as well, even though people think that was sort of a multicultural pot. It was really, there was still very strong segregated areas and neighborhoods and so forth. And the Bronx was a forgotten neighborhood. So, keep in mind that was a neighborhood that from the late 60s on down into the 70s really went down economically speaking. I mean, there was, the city was bankrupt or almost bankrupt, and there was a lot of other things going on at that time. So those were my roots, but my best memories are probably just family. I was around a lot of family, very multicultural family. So, I always thought of my family as sort of the United Nations, being from the Caribbean. And yeah, it was an interesting experience until I went to Germany. Of course, I had a stint in Queens, New York before that. Going to Germany was all very opposite. I think the initial sort of impression was very, very different in nature. I was perceived differently. Obviously, I looked different, right? So this was, I came into a place that was all German, and the kids were all German. So, they looked at me different. And that was the first time I really saw myself as different, right? I never had that experience before. And that was difficult. So a lot of discrimination and racism, and also being jumped, and the N-word became my sort of middle name. So it was very difficult to navigate that system at that time. But on the other hand, it was also, sort of an opening to a new world in terms of culturally, language, and so forth. So I think my art turned out to be sort of this combination of these two worlds in many ways.
So as an adult, before you were an artist, you were in the Army for 8 years and you served in the Gulf War. Thank you so much for your service, first of all. And you have shared that, after that experience, you suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. And so as a form of therapy to help you with this, you picked up art. And so clearly there's got to be something that was so cathartic here for you. I would love to hear more about that moment, and what was it about art that helped you heal?
Yeah, I came back, art was always in my life, obviously, from very little on. As I mentioned before, in Queens, I had this competition that I won when I started school, and I had a painting that was hung in the Lever House at that time, which was interesting because it sort of made me realize you could actually have something, a piece of art, and show it, and people would come to it. So I had a very early realization that was something you could use instead of just sort of doodling on a piece of paper and using as an outlet, but it could also be used as a voice, and it could be shown, right? So in the military, when I came back from the Gulf War in 1991, we got back in April. I was still Fort Bragg, North Carolina for about a year before I got sent to Korea at the DMZ for a second assignment. And I was the 2nd Infantry there at the DMZ. And it was there when I started having difficulties because it was a very isolated camp. And it was, it was very difficult to get off post. So you had to sort of put in these passes to get off post. And I think it was that isolation that in part also had me just had a lot of time to think about what happened in the Gulf War and my situation there and how I wound up there and all these other things that happened. And so when I came back after that year tour, I went to Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and as Aberdeen Proving Grounds, I started a Gulf War therapy program at Walter Reed. And Walter Reed had these programs for Gulf War veterans at the time, and it was really great because you could, the veterans could go in and we were examined on neurological things, but also psychological. But part of that program was art therapy, and art therapy was great for me since I was, an artist by heart. I was able to go in and paint and draw and things. Not, some of the soldiers didn't do too well with it because it just really didn't have that. And they thought, what the hell am I doing here? But for me, it was great because it was, I realized also it was an outlet and it was something that I could use for therapy. And I guess the people that worked there also noticed it. And, and I don't know what happened to those paintings and those drawings actually, but, it was just a time where it was a realization that it dawned on me that's something I could possibly do even for a living at some point, or maybe even, get into as a hobby more. But I still had a couple of years in service. So I was still in for about, I think, 3 years after that. And, but that was the key moment that I had that realization that art could be also not only therapy, but also something that you do as a profession.
Well, I would love to see some of those originals. You have to dig them up and find them somewhere. You mentioned how, art was also a way to use your voice, and your work has this undercurrent that examines these various power structures and casualties of war. You made a faceless series of portraits, and that's, really a nod to anonymity and secrecy throughout history. Tell me more about these topics that you're portraying and the perspective you're bringing to this work.
Yeah, these are the series that you mentioned, the Faces series that started in 2011. And I was investigating power structures. And as you said, power structures has always been sort of a battle in my life, from really the minute I encountered power structures, which was from a very early age. So I guess if I had to draw it back to something that triggered those ideas, it would have to probably go back to childhood. But then again, in the military, you also have these power structures, and politically, you have these power structures. So I started examining power structures as whether it was psychological, military, or economic power structures that are always around us, obviously, and in part why we have a conflict today with so many different things, not just here in the United States, but globally. And I thought the best way to do it was with these faceless characters and what is power and where does power reside? Does it reside with an accumulation of people uniting, or does it reside with these secret characters that are anonymous that you don't really see, but that can also implement power, right? So there's there was this question of where does power really lie, and who are the powerful really? And so I really got into the series, but that really led me all the way. I started with these guys in suits, these faceless individuals in suits, and it went all the way to these colonial figures, so now there's a big topic also about colonialism at large, especially Western colonialism, and how we got to this point in terms of how power was inflicted without, in particular, minority groups, women, and especially African Americans being involved in those decision making. So a lot of the latest works have to do with this sort of examination of Western colonialism, not just, from a Confederacy standpoint, but from a larger standpoint of how did we really get these ideologies in place.
And it's neat to note that, as serious as your art themes are, there's still this kind of amusing, approachable energy about your work. And I feel like it comes from, the color palette and this incredible brush stroke you use. And I pick up all these different styles. I get a sense of graffiti, but also maybe like some Keith Haring whimsy in there as well. Tell me about your method for creating a painting. And I understand you're working with oil enamels.
Yeah, I did an apprenticeship as a house painter before I went to school. And that's probably when I met or when I got in touch with these oil enamels, right? Because you paint, these house paints. And they stayed with me, so I use them a lot for many of the paintings. Now, unlike others, and in academia, they'll use different tube paints and so forth. But I find these really liquid and free in application, so I can thin them with with turpentine, or I could use them thick. I could really do whatever I want with them. There's a lot of freedom with them. I just have this, I guess, initial idea that it has to do with things that really affect me one way or another, whether it's political or social, or whether it's something that ties to my own background, or whether it's something from my own past, and I approach it critically. But you mentioned something about these colors and everything. I think the colors are really something that comes from sort of the graffiti art scene in the 1980s, which I was introduced to in New York, and in the 80s when I met Wes Rubenstein, or West One, who was one of the legendary initial graffiti writers out of the New York City, Manhattan scene. And I met him in 1986. And, I learned what was going on in the subway scene, and these kids really out of, from where I was initially from, reacting to these, the social elements around them, and the things that were going on in time at that particular time. And those colors were interesting to me because they had so much excitement, and they were sort of bubbly and childish at the same time. And I tend to use similar colors to draw people into the work and keep some of that excitement, but yet you have this sort of raw, very serious topic. So it's something that draws people in, but yet, you realize, and all of a sudden, okay, it's not Mickey Mouse and sort of, a happy topic. Oftentimes it's very serious, serious analysis or questioning of something.
What do you hope viewers get out of your work?
I hope they're arrested with work. I think that's the main thing that most artists really want is, for people for an artwork to arrest them in that moment. Not something that you just walk by, but something that that touches you and that makes you contemplate, and not just about the work, but about yourself and our surroundings. And I hope they serve as a mirror of some sort. Everybody looking at it brings something else to the table, a different intellect, a different experience. And they're not dictatorial, so they don't tell you what to think. They're simply just, provocations in a way, to look at and sort of compare with what you know, or to want to know more. I think that would be great.
Last question. In honor of Black History Month, what do you feel your voice as an artist adds to the dialogue culturally?
Well, I hope my work adds to art history, in one way or another. I mean, that's what we try to do as artists, I guess, is we're not here to sort of repeat what was done, but to question what was done before, right? Especially when it comes to history. Like I said, I think it's it's important that different point of views are seen. I mean, history is, especially, if you go to museums these days, it's largely from a Western European view. And this is now, slowly changing. But I think it's important that in these stages, especially with the movements that have been going on, that minority voices, women voices, African-American voices, and people of color are more presented, because I mean, that in the end is what history is, right? Is that we have this sort of, global representation of what history is, and not just a one-sided view.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Well, you're definitely adding to that mixing pot, and a wonderful voice. So thank you so much, Marcus. This is such a treat, and we wish you all the best for your next series, and can't wait to see what happens next for you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks for having me.
Really happy to be here, and excited to have what I think is a fantastic panel on a really good topic. So the topic is, as Tina mentioned, designing the welcome back, and yeah, we're in the middle of that. It's a work in progress. Our whole lives are a work in progress right now. But what is clear is that remote work basically has changed things, and the shuttle between home and office is no longer the same, and we have to think about spaces in between, and also changing the spaces that we're used to. And so the third space becomes the second space. Our second space is now often our first spaces, and everything needs to be rethought. I think, especially in the realm of hospitality. And I think that makes a lot of sense to have a firm like B+H hosting. And to start off, we're going to have Katie Clark, who's the Senior Hospitality and Workplace Designer from B+H and President of NEWH Northwest. She's going to give a little presentation just to give you a little bit of background, and then we'll jump into the panel. So Katie, please take it away.
Okay, so kind of just building off of what Sam already shared, everything is possible. This slide speaks to us. It's a corporate design space that also incorporates a lot of our hospitality components. We specifically chose this saying as a marker of, what are we doing and why are we doing it, and what is possible. And this is something we ask ourselves every day when we come to work. Over the past 2 weeks to 2 months to 2 years of this pandemic, we have collectively spent so much effort and energy dreaming and postulating about what return to office is going to look like, what it will mean. All of our major corporate clients we've spent so much time planning it, getting to the point of execution, and then rethinking all of it, because really at the heart of it, we have to ask ourselves, why will people come back? We've had some false starts going, and we haven't quite gotten that down in the real world of what are we making that is going to attract the people to come back to these kinds of workplace situations. What we've really unearthed is that we don't necessarily want to be alone, nor do we want to cede the ground that we've gotten to not go back to the previous norm of clocking in and clocking out in specific spaces at specific times. The entire world really readily adapted the notion that flexible hours means we are always available. And our tentative availability, we feel, will never be tamed back into traditional business hours again. So why should where we work be any different? Humans tend to need to belong and to group together, to share ideas, to commiserate, to encourage each other, to vent when we need to freely. Sometimes we even need to be alone but together at the same time, which is a theme that we've really seen come to light in the last decade or so with corporate design. And I think that it really plays into the world of hospitality in restaurants, in hotels and lobbies and all of that as well. Collaboration has taken a second seat to powerful allure of pure production. And the much discussed hybrid model would have us believe that production and collaboration are mutually exclusive items that we can perfectly place throughout our day in our calendars and achieve this like masterful use of utilization rate. What we now understand is that productivity is fueled by collaboration. Our shared experience of this forceful untethering that we all have been through from our office spaces has empowered us to keep pushing at these new boundaries. We're desperately seeking each other in real life, meaningful situations and spaces where we can be inspired and inspire each other. Remote work has freed us from the inevitable shuttle between home and office, opening a wide array of choices for any time, any place work can occur. People are seeking different spaces for different needs, different uses, different feelings. They're choosing to work where they feel happiest and comfortable, whether that's close to home, close to the office, or in a whole new world of freedom of travel. Hospitality in its truest sense is meaning the friendly and generous reception and entertainment of guests, visitors, or strangers is now the new everything. Hotels, bars, restaurants, and coffee shops are destinations of choice. The convergence between workplace and social space is fueling demand for new spaces and experiences with people at their heart.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Katie. That's a really concise and really helpful way to start. And I think I think, exploring what is the idea of what is a workplace, because I think we all had a very clear idea of it until a couple of years ago, and now who knows, we're still defining it as we speak, which is really scary and exciting at the same time. So to discuss that with Katie and I, we also have Kate Buska. She's the Vice President of Brand Development and Communications at Practice Hospitality. We have Stephanie Deshays. She's the Strategic Accounts, NCIDQ of Strategic Accounts at Architects Fabrics. And we have Misha Tramp. She's the VP of Strategy and Insights at Metya. I hope I pronounced that right, Misha. So thank you all for being on. Really a pleasure to have you, and excited to start this conversation. And again, thanks to our sponsors, Versteel and Groa. Really always appreciate their support, and also to B+H for hosting us. So the first question I'm going to ask is to Kate, because wanted to talk to you about, we're talking about this convergence between the workplace and social space, and what does that even mean anymore? So I want to talk to you about kind of how work and leisure are merging in your projects, what you're working on, and who are some of the people that are sharing these spaces? Who are the clients? Who are the people that you're looking to serve, and where is the trend heading as you serve those clients?
Delighted to be here, Sam. Thanks so much. Yeah, it's a fantastic topic. Welcome is the business that I'm in, and so getting people back into spaces and on the road is really exciting. I think hotels, hospitality, we've seen the private work and social spaces, sort of bleeding into each other for years. It's been an evolution that has, like Katie said, really fed into how people work. And for us, that was driven by business travelers and that people working on the road. And right now, there was some thought for, maybe last year that business travel was dead and it's never coming back, and it's a thing of the past. And that's definitely not true. Business travel is coming back. We don't expect full recovery until 2024, but by the end of this year, it's going to be at 80% of what it was. So we know it's coming back, but really who that person is changing. Who the business traveler is changing. Just the way that we work changed, the way that we travel for work is changing. It really used to be those big corporate accounts that were the segment driver. But right in the pandemic, it was the small and medium-sized businesses that started to come back, which, makes sense. They're a little more flexible, a little more nimble, probably less restrictions. It's a smaller ship to turn. But those large managed corporate accounts, they still are staying down, and I'm not sure that they'll come back exactly as it was before, just the same way that offices are not necessarily coming back as they were before, that this has really been a change in how we do work. We're seeing those small businesses come back. So, we're looking at consulting agencies, law and accounting firms, retailers, and we see that continuing in the near term. And so that has us thinking about what those clients need, because what they need is very different than someone who's coming to town with a major office that they're going into that has conference rooms and all the resources. So we need to be a little bit more for those smaller agencies, and the way that they're meeting their clients and doing things on the road is different. So right in the hotel space, that is changing, but we're also seeing sort of macro trends in the way that people travel. Leisure, we all heard about it before the pandemic. It was a buzzword in 2019. But it was sort of a great PR catchphrase and something that was evolving. I think it has really accelerated. That is an actual fact now. There was a survey last year, and almost 90% of business travelers said that they are going to add some, leisure time onto their trip. So that's become a reality. And so what does that mean for hotels, and what does that mean also for that transition, how they're working, being away from the office? And we're also seeing the idea of digital nomads was a kind of, again, a romantic soundbite, and these, sort of people on a beach with their feet propped up. But, working from home has really proved that you don't need to be in the office. And those that have the flexibility is really, I think, on the rise. So what does that digital nomad now mean in terms of where are they choosing their destinations? What do us as hotels need to provide them? And, it's still a niche segment. Skift, and a hospitality industry publication, reported as like 3.7 million Americans that are really able to do that now. But I suspect that is going to be growing and increasing, especially as those leisure travelers get a taste for the life on the road. So that really, to come full circle, means, my gosh, what do offices have to do to get people in there? Because people, to Katie's point, are going to want to connect. And so we're thinking about how do we create spaces in hospitality, but I'm sure that office teams are thinking about how do we compete with this being on the road, and what hotels and coffee shops and restaurants have to offer in terms of luring people in. I think that the hospitality lessons that maybe were picked up by office designers and tech companies that were trying to lure people to work at, Google instead of Microsoft, then now it's something like all offices are going to be combating. How do you bring people in? So we're looking at how do we facilitate this new lifestyle of travel and work in hospitality.
Right. I think what you said at the end there about luring people in. I think we can no longer sort of take for granted that, workers, just like hospitality has to work to get people to come, offices and anywhere else are going to have to do the same. They can't just kind of rest on their laurels. So maybe that competition will create some innovation. I think it already is. By the way, I wanted to make a quick correction. Sorry. Very sorry to Stephanie. I totally messed up your title. So sorry about that. I must be in the second or third or fourth space or wherever. So your Stephanie is brand ED chair or branded chair at NEWH. Is that right, Stephanie? Again, I'm sorry about that.
It looks like she might be frozen, but that is correct. It's brand ed with NEWH.
Okay, great. Oh, brand ed. Got it.
And
now
it's clever.
Now we froze you too, Stephanie. I don't know what else are we going to do. Anyway, my apologies for that, but such is the new virtual world, which I like to blame on everything. So anyway,
it's a pretty picture to freeze on.
Yeah. No, if you're going to freeze, it's always the worst when you freeze going like that. So I'm glad that, definitely a good freezing strategy. So anyway, Katie, I wanted to ask you the next question, and it's more from the design kind of angle on this. And I want to remind everybody, after we do this first round of questions, we're going to open the floor also to the audience. So in the Q&A bar, feel free to as we're going, ask any questions that you have as we go. So, but Katie, how have your designs changed to adapt to this and improve this new reality? And what are the biggest challenges with doing it? Because obviously, this is new. Hospitality is seeping into everything, but it's not like there's an established model. So what are the challenges, and what are you doing to approach it?
I think I am of two worlds, of different challenges. So to tack on to what Kate was saying, in the corporate design world and in the office design, we've always had to worry about luring talent from other places and making our client is having the coolest space or the most gimmicky space or what have you with the design. And so we know kind of the level of competition, but we are now competing with what in that sector, what are we helping our clients create that combats home or combats, I'm just gonna go meet someone at the coffee shop. So there's that world that we are trying to we have a foot in. And then my passion is hospitality, and that encompasses hotels, that encompasses food and beverage, any place that you would meet publicly. And so, that is now, I don't think we've really ever seen those segments be competition. They're very siloed prior to to the world we're in now. And I think they do kind of come together. You know, I guess a study in this and kind of what triggered this whole thought exercise for us was about 1 month after lockdown, we completed an 18-story building reposition for one of our major corporate clients. And so, you know, no one was in the office right away when they first opened. And now the office is back, and sort of as an afterthought, you know, we spent a couple of years designing the space, building out. It's beautiful. But as an afterthought, we redid the entire building lobby and also refreshed all the independent food and beverage components of that lobby. And that's been open for about 9 months now. And that is absolutely swamped and packed with people from the tower above, from the towers surrounding, and they're not necessarily going up. So like that was kind of a big clue to us of, hey, there's something here. You know, we designed that lobby for the clients above. And so we took a lot of the components, and I know I'm jumping ahead in questions, but they all kind of merged together. We took some components that we have always utilized in corporate workplace design, which is every surface is a work surface. It needs to be comfortable with the seat height, and every space that you sit, you need to be able to plug in without awkwardly reaching in underneath of you or behind you or tripping over cords. So ease of use, interfacing of that kind of technology. We put that everywhere in this lobby, and it is like moths to the flame. Like people are there, they're plugged in constantly. They're like grabbing coffee where, you know, if they went up the tower, the coffee is a different offering that's part of their perks, but they're staying in the lobby. They're creating you know, value for the other building tenants and for the landlords. And so we just really see that as kind of a proof positive of this idea that corporate is bleeding into the hospitality, and there's ways to design around that to welcome it and allow it to compete against in a friendly way against the corporate design, and kind of spread around. When people are leaving their houses, where are they going? They don't need to just go to one destination and go back to their house. We need people to kind of reemerge back into the collective world around them and be comfortable there.
Right. That's really interesting. I mean, I guess you do, in general, we hear so much about how the workplace is changing, and how, you know, hospitality is coming into workplace, and how, you know, it's becoming much more lively, but you don't hear as much about how workplace is coming into hospitality. I think, you know, when the kind of mobile revolution has hit, we heard a little bit about that, but I think it's interesting to see, like you said, when you broke out of that silo and said, okay, let's bring some of this office technology and really bring it into hospitality, you know, how much of a benefit that can be. And I guess that's just a good lesson for anybody that wants to like break out of the silos, like as we brought up in the beginning. I think, I don't know, it just always seems to be a good idea.
And from the hospitality design solution strategy, what we also know is that not everyone works for a giant tech company. So again, piggybacking on what Kate said is, you know, if we look at, I'm going to piggyback on something earlier she said too, that the hotel, for instance, is a pillar of the community that they're in. Not everyone works for the big companies. I don't think I'm allowed to say them. You guys can say them. They're our clients. So, you know, not everyone works there. Not everyone has access to the great thought practice and efforts that they're putting into how their spaces are flexible for them, how they're making, you know, alone together spaces, how they're making, you know, collaboration spaces. So being able to give the rest of the working from anywhere population options that welcomes them in, activates your spaces, potentially creates some revenue, so some, you know, different sources of revenue, is something that I think is really exciting and has always been there, but I think it can be a whole new actual push and component to what makes hospitality function in cities, in all cities.
Right. And Stephanie, it looks like you're back from being frozen, and I don't know if you missed the part where I apologize for totally messing up your title. So
it's fine. You can call. I'll answer to whatever you're calling. It's fine.
But I think, yeah, this is definitely an interesting conversation. So I think I was going to ask you about some of this, kind of also getting into more specifics about strategies you can take to make workplaces feel, less like work. We do talk about the importance of hospitality everywhere, but I think we don't really know how to implement that to the extent that it really, it becomes sort of standard versus just like kind of the outlier. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, sort of changing our perceptions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love Katie's definition of hospitality. I'll make it even simpler, maybe boil it down. So fundamentally, hospitality is a feeling, right? So if you give hospitality, then it's about how you treat people. If you receive hospitality, it's how it makes you feel. That said, I could argue that hospitality can exist anywhere. So I'll go through some examples. The corporate office, as we're just talking about, reception is a natural place for hospitality to happen. But prior to the pandemic, I was noticing this trend of young people being staffed at the reception desk, looking at their phone, not acknowledging me for quite a few beats, and they don't know if I'm an important client or just a vendor, right? So obviously, lots of room for improvement and hospitality to be infused in that. As both Kate and Katie mentioned, employers are now in the delicate position of, encouraging, maybe even wooing back their staff to the office. And I was actually recently just talking to another client of mine who's designing a large tech campus headquarters, which I also tell you who it is. But they originally programmed this space to be a traditional cafeteria, and then decided to expand it to and turn it into a place to meet and to play and to eat and to work, essentially turning it into a hotel lobby, right? And now employees as the guest, right? Hospitals. So when I was a designer at MBBJ 20 years ago, we had a retreat, and we were brainstorming, think tanking on how to improve the patient experience for a mom and baby floor. And we came up with this idea of a virtual grandma, as say a concierge to help new moms with questions and take some of the pressure off of the caregivers. Now that idea was almost theoretical at the time, but very achievable now. So how can we use technology to improve the patient experience, have it be more hospitable? And then speaking of grandma, senior living. So there is quite a bit of competition in this vertical market right now, and the lines between hotels and senior communities are quickly blurring. There's actually a winery in Portland and tasting room that is available to the public by membership, and it was built by a senior living organization on their Portland campus. I mean, what better way to get, to encourage visits to grandma than that?
Wow, I'm retiring now.
And then probably one of my most provocative examples is prisons, right? What aspects of hospitality can we learn from and adapt to rehabilitate humans? Now, I don't have an example for this, obviously, but one thing that we've learned from the pandemic is that isolation is counterproductive to our mental health. So I'll leave it at that, and we can move on and talk more.
That's fascinating. I mean, that's really branching out, which I think is fascinating. I mean, you're talking about senior housing, which is something I'm looking a lot at because my parents and I are looking at places for them. And you're right. I've seen there's definitely a bridge. There's a lot of hospitality design. You can't, which is great. I mean, I think once upon a time, it would feel not like a good place to be. And now it feels like a fun sort of hotel / resort /
Exactly.
And I think it's very effective. So I think that concept of hospitality as a feeling is right on. I think that's really interesting. And I also like what you're saying about, using, everything you have, including technology, to work to create that kind of hospitable feeling. And that brings me to a question I have for Misha, in sort of informing this kind of design. what is the role of technology and of data in kind of informing it? What are the metrics you're looking at? What are you measuring? How does that kind of angle on it kind of play a role in what's developing here?
Yeah, so my lens, I suppose, is on behalf of my clients. So the majority of my clients are in B2B tech, whether that is in software or legal tech or health tech. I am helping them to understand how they can achieve commercial outcomes, be that from employees or their customers. So I'm not necessarily looking at helping them ask their employees what's going to get you back into the office, etc. So my lens is, your X software company, how do you create a strategy so that your technology can be the one that is going to enable this new world of work, right? So when it comes to the analysis that I'm doing, I'm actually looking at it linguistically, right? So, I've actually been looking at this sadly for actually, almost 30 years now, in one way or the other, looking at the language of work, the unit of work, as it's often referred to. And interestingly, this isn't necessarily a new thing. And people think that, COVID has created all these net new trends, and this is something brand new. And in fact, it's not. So what COVID has done has accelerated the trends. But, I've been analyzing this kind of thing for a really long time. So, 20 years ago, we were referring to it as, digital convergence. And then we referred to it as digital transformation. And now we're referring to it as digital congruence. And I'll explain what I mean a little bit, about that. So when you ask me about the metrics I'm looking at how are people talking about work and where work happens and what their needs are around work. And not just from the employee perspective, but the customer experience. Can customers get the same experience digitally from a bank as they can from going into a branch? To your point about that feeling that you mentioned, Stephanie, around hospitality, I would argue in B2B, it applies just as much, right? Do I get that same feeling when I go online with my bank as I do when I, get a smile and the person knows my name in my branch, right? The same applies in every touch point and every customer experience or customer journey, and the same thing as an employee. As an employee servicing customers, do I feel the same as if I'm, effectively a chatbot versus picking up the phone, right? So that's what I do, and been looking at it, through that lens of what does digitalization mean? And this has been happening for a really long time. The difference now is where that burden of power sits, and I don't like using the word power, right? But what's definitely happened now is that what I'm seeing in terms of trend is that, whereas before when we talked about digital convergence, and what that meant is automation, right? The unit of work happened when processes started getting automated, right? And that meant people could start working from different places, right? In different spaces. And then we talked about digital transformation, which meant the unit of work started happening on my device. And that meant that I could start working from anywhere. People started talking about working from anywhere. But now what we've recognized is the unit of work happens wherever I am. So the trend I'm seeing now through the data I'm looking at is this idea of it's not so much hybrid working, because hybrid is kind of almost, it's still to your point, I like this notion of the emotion. It's kind of an emotionless work. It's kind of a robotic word, if that, it's like I'm some kind of cyborg, right? Whereas, it still implies a one or the other, or I'm doing a bit of this and a bit of that, right? Whereas in actuality, what we're talking about is distributed. It means that the unit of work happens wherever I choose to be, right? And it's not necessarily a work-enabled space, right? It's about a work-friendly culture. And it really is about culture and the culture that the organization enables. and a nation, and someone used the word untethered, and we are in this sort of, and I need to be careful that I don't just keep crapping on, because I could forever and ever, but we are in this sort of, there's a lot of pent up innovation that I'm seeing in the data I'm looking at, as opposed to this notion of recovery. I'm seeing that there is this, let's move forward. There's a real desire to move forward, to innovate. And as a consequence of that, people are looking for freedom. That, I don't know who used the word untethered, but part of feeling untethered is the ability to make choices, as opposed to this idea of hybrid, which says, well, I know what, let's have a calendar and we'll all agree that on Thursdays, twice a month, we'll all come in and we'll schedule these meeting rooms. I'm seeing a very adverse reaction to that sort of thing. So anyway, I guess long story short, data-wise, it's not a new thing. There's different language being used. The thing I am seeing is where the center of gravity of the power is, and employers that don't understand that actually what they need to focus on is how to enable distributed working, and that actually it's the notion of where the unit of work happens, and they need to focus less on the productivity that happens in the device and how they measure that, which is what digital transformation was all about. The unit of work happens where your employee is, and it's cultural and it's about emotion, and they need to focus on whatever they need to do to untether that in order to make productivity productive and collaborative.
That's interesting. I really like that term, distributed working. I like it better than hybrid. I like that. I think that makes a lot more sense. It gives even just in the description, there's more freedom to it, which I think is really helpful. And I think that's sort of the idea. Hybrid's supposed to be less rigid, but it's still kind of rigid. And I guess the follow up to that, what kind of came to mind to me is, yes, the kind of that distributed working, that freedom is incredible, and I'm taking advantage of it as I work from home and or wherever, and I think that it's been a really positive thing. But there is that negative side, of course, which is, if you have that freedom, you also have work with you everywhere and all the time, possibly. And are there strategies that you've seen as far as even in you're saying the language of work and the strategies of work to sort of work to combat that, the fact that, with this freedom comes the possibility of being engulfed all the time?
Well, I mean, that's why, sorry, you're asking me?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yes. I think that's why hybrid working leans too much towards the notion of productivity and devices. That's why it's got such a negative connotation, whereas distributed working also means you can be your whole self, right? I mean, it was interesting, I can't remember who also, someone used the word convergence. This notion of convergence initially started, people talked about this idea of imposter syndrome. I don't know if you know that term got coined in the 90s even, where I'm one person at home and I'm a different person at work, and then it was like, well, I've got one device for work and one device at home, so I don't want these two worlds colliding, and now I've got one device for both, right? And now I'm just like, my spaces have collided, and actually I don't want them to, right? Now I want to separate my spaces. The whole point about distribution means that you can chunk things out and put them and compartmentalize them where you want to, whereas hybrid means you can be bugged at any point in time, right? And distributed working means that it takes it away from devices and cloud. And the other thing that it does is somebody mentioned, I think actually Katie in your presentation at the beginning, you use the word production, and that's so spot on, because software companies in particular are so guilty of banging on and be more productive. When I hear us stop it, I do enough, I want to do less, I don't want to do more. And actually the emphasis of distributed working is actually about collaboration. right? And it's not about being on your own and doing more and banging more work out and being more productive. And the idea of being distributed means you go out, you're in the world, you're moving, you're collaborating, as opposed to being available the entire time. Which, and again, it might sound like a pedantic difference, but because I analyze language all the time, when you look at the topics that emerge around hybrid working, it sadly conjures up images of you being available to everybody all the time, right? And communicating through devices all the time. Whereas distributed working means I have the freedom to be where I want, when I want, with whomever I want to. And I can actually choose, I can have the freedom to work how I want to. So it conjures up. So distributed work is not my word, by the way, it's the language I'm seeing emerging. I'd like to
right.
Well, I have a good example of that too,
Yeah.
Misha. It's, you know, it's actually with one of Katie's colleagues. We met at the lobby of the Fairmont, and we were very productive collaboratively together. And that was where we chose to be. And her colleague turned to me and said, I'm going to just work here every day. This is so lovely. So there's like a joy element of changing your scenery and finding a different place to work where you might actually be inspired. You're designing a hotel. Why not do it in a hotel? Exactly. You know, I mean.
And to piggyback on that, one of the things that we find challenging as, you know, people come to us for solutions. And so we can test fit and lay out a million solutions. But we also take into account the psychology of it. And I think one thing we've learned, and I think I'm speaking to an audience of a lot of architects and designers maybe, is that I think a lot of people complain or fear that this distributed work or the hybrid model, since everyone else is kind of slow on that, is taking humans away from each other. We're only collaborating and communicating via technology, and that's making everything sterile. But I would argue if you could take a step back and think about it, in order for that to be successful, it actually requires more human interaction and trust and like basic human instincts to interact with each other, because I have to trust my team that we all know when the deadline is and they're doing it whenever it is, because I need to be able to do it whenever I am working on it. You know, I have kids, I have a million other hats that I have to wear throughout the day. So it has been freeing to be able to, you know, put in hours that I would never have been able to do because I would be expected to be here in this seat from 9 to 5. And now I can choose where I distribute those, and that might mean it's a really long night for me, but I got to do all the things I wanted to do during the day. And I think it's removing the, you know, micromanaging component that we kind of rely on a lot in office environments, to say, I trust that my teammate's going to handle their part of it, whether they're meeting at the Fairmont, coming back with great ideas, which happened, or, you know, or at home, you know, banging away on renderings. Like we all know, and we have to trust. And I feel like that's actually getting more connected than we were in the office, because we have to rely on that differently.
Right.
The psychology is different. Yeah.
Katie, it's almost like people have grown up. Like we've all realized that we're adults and that we are making good decisions. And so if you want to, on the hospitality side, if people want to travel and add on that leisure trip, and there's not that sort of suspicious, you know, put in your expense report, account for every hour of your time. Why are you adding on that trip? Why is your family traveling with you? Or for digital nomads, as they emerge in the hospitality space, like there's a lot of questions where people were like, you have to be here in the office, you have to be accountable. And it's more being accountable for getting the work done and accountable to each other than to a time clock.
Yeah, that's really interesting, I think. And the trusting is really like a key part of that. It's like, no, we can trust you to do this. We're not going to hover over you. It's giving you freedom, but trusting you and also giving you the boundaries that you kind of want. So it seems like it's sort of a revolutionary, and when you start to think about it, shift as far as not just how we're working, but just the dynamics of worker and employer. That is just kind of incredible if you start to think about it. I just wanted to quickly, we're going to do another poll, which has sort of, as you'll see, is sort of related to what we're talking about for sure. Before I do that, I want to thank our sponsors for Steel and Groa. Here again, we're talking about third spaces and where you're working. So, what's the number one feature of a third space when working? And we'll get the answer a little bit later, and we can talk about that. But please, everybody in the audience, if you can answer this, that'd be great. And while we're waiting.
Sorry, I have to jump in. Kate, something you
No, please do. Please do.
You just talked about trust with employers, and one other trend as well that I'm seeing connected to that is even, one of the things I always talk about is you get the behavior you measure, right? And that's obviously particularly true when you think about, employees and the behaviors you get from them. And one of the things that, certainly I'm encouraging clients to think about with employees is, focus on measuring outcomes, not outputs, right? And if you start focusing, you start thinking about that trust equation, is like, why are you measuring, how many hours a day? I mean, if you're a firm, right, it's billable hours, or, the amount of stuff people are producing. Who cares if they ended up spending an extra 3 days having a lovely time on the beach, if ultimately the desired outcome was achieved? Do you know what I mean? And so it's, I feel like, where we're focusing on a world that actually let's focus on the outcome of productivity and collaboration, not the amount of productive time. People can hide in an office just as easily as they can hide at home, right? And so anyway, I just wanted to sort of, that trust thing triggered that thought that, we need to encourage people to focus on outcomes, not outputs. And if we could all have a lovelier time in the process, how great would that be?
Yeah, that's great. Outcomes, not outputs. From your lips to, I don't know, whoever's ears. And Katie, you have your hand up. You were going to add something.
Oh, I forgot to take it down. I just jumped in.
Okay, great. I never get used to the Zoom hand anyway.
I didn't know how formal to be.
I think we get the results. Speaking of third spaces and outcomes, looks like, oh, that's interesting. The number one feature of a third space when working, access. Yeah, that makes sense. Access to outlets and Wi-Fi. I guess that's the number one. That is the number one. Obviously, there's a lot more to that, and interesting to see that number two is the space separation, over lighting, over acoustics. And yeah, when I go into a space, that does make some sense. So that is interesting. I think we're all figuring out what we need and what we want, and obviously Wi-Fi is like the very basic. But there's an interesting question from the audience. Katie Guyton wants to follow up on what Katie was saying, just to get even more kind of specific examples. What are some of the strategies you're seeing as successful tacks to luring workers back into the office? Every conversation we've had on Think Tank, there's so much of this idea of luring people to the office, and I think it's absolutely makes sense. It's because we're so used to having what we want here. How are you going to get us back?
I guess my first question would be, why? Why do you want them back? Why do you need them back? What are they? What can we design for better that gives you the solution, or gives you what you feel that you're not getting as an employer from them not being in the office? Do you feel that they're not collaborating? Because that's a different, to what Misa's hit on a lot, is that collaboration is production, is like fuels productivity and makes it. So, are we seeing that there's frustration because you feel like everyone's separated and no one's working together, and no one's creating that trust that needs to happen in order for this new world to happen? Or, are we trying to, create these massively luxurious places that why would you want to be at your home anymore? Like those are completely different reasons. And to really, to be successful, I think you have to be honest with what you're aiming for in order to allow the design process to work for you. So that's kind of a gray area, I guess.
Well, and Katie, it's,
Right.
you know, we can't ignore the fact that we have a employee retention and hiring issue right now. Like, you know, um, what does the employee want? You know, it's going to have to come into play as we're navigating the Great Resignation, which is not over by any stretch, and there's still a talent drought. Didn't we come up with some idea of an incentive card to send? What was that in our pre-meeting? I think Misha.
We talked
the
about
token.
Yeah.
We work
Yeah.
on floor.
Yeah, giving people the opportunity, because it could be coming into the office, but it might be just getting them together in another space that doesn't necessarily need to be your office. So we talked about how could hospitality spaces be an extension of people's office, because we've got the built-in amenities, we've got the staff. We talked really about the flip side of that, Stephanie, how do we efficiently design these spaces so that we as hospitality operators or as companies can staff and provide because it's hard to get servers or people to, you know, man and facilitate these spaces. How can we work together? And companies could perhaps use hotels or restaurants as a sort of satellite of their space, because to your point, it is what does the employee need as well? Like, really, what do they need to be productive? And maybe it's that, you know, there's collaboration, but sometimes there's just that human connection, that inspiration that you'll just never get on, you know, no shade, and we're on a Zoom call, but on a Zoom call, like, you know, it's really that coming together. So I think that thinking about what those spaces are and how could even hospitality and office collaborate.
Yeah, and I think there's associated change management, though, that needs to go alongside it. So I know that, you know, a lot of the work that I'm doing and clients I've got are struggling with is that when you've got a group of employees who effectively are sitting on conference calls for 8 hours a day, and those conference calls are people with, you know, in multiple locations, the idea of doing that in a physical space makes no sense whatsoever, right? Is why would I go to a physical space to be sitting in rows of people or in a meeting room just to have headphones in, staring into a laptop all day? And I think that's some of the dissonance that employees have with this idea of going, you know, this is the whole thing, is going back, right? And the other thing to remember as well, of course, it's been 2 years now, and I know even in my own company, probably, I don't know, at least 25% of the people in our business have never had a job before. So they're not going back into an office. They've never started in an office. So, you know, there is that as well. And so, you know, there's a lot of change management that's involved in terms of working practices. It's not just a question of saying, now we're going to be in the same physical space, right? It's a question of, we need to change the way that we work, right? Before being in the same physical space even makes any sense. So you're not in the place where you've just got your headphones in, or you're screaming into a computer all day with 10 other people doing the same thing. So I think that's certainly the resistance that I'm hearing, which is why this idea of being, and you know, Stephanie, you mentioned that you and Katie were, you know, in the Fairmont, actually, which is where I was earlier. And you were doing work, and this idea of contextually relevant spaces, that's the other word I wanted to use. So in your particular case, you were doing work and you were in a space that was contextually relevant to that work, right? And that's another trend I think we need to consider is, you know, where am I going to do that work most productively? And that's the space I want to collaborate in, right? And so, you know, when it comes to, the question that was being asked, how do you encourage people to come back? Number one, not everyone's coming back, right? You've got to remember that you've got net new talent that never started in an office to begin with at all. And even people who started an office to begin with now have completely different jobs than when they did last time. Those people who even are supposed veterans also moved jobs during the pandemic and never went into the office of the company that they're working for. So everything has changed. So they're not going back, right? There's a lot of change management. So I'm not in the design space or hospitality space, but what I do know is that, we need to focus on helping organizations to redefine or rethink their culture, and then think about the spaces that culture needs to occupy, and that may need to be distributed.
Right. You can't just say, okay, so we're going to go back to the same thing. And it's more than like it's you said the idea of hospitality being a feeling. It's like work is also sort of like, it's a broader thing. It's not just like, okay, it's this space and we're just going to come back and it's going to be a little different. It's like, no, you have to rethink the entire mindset.
If everyone thought like Stephanie did, if businesses started with here are the emotional connections we would like to create in our culture. We would like to collaborate around these emotional connections. Help us understand how we do that. And you ideate around that. The spaces you would create would be, and you do that as a collaborative exercise. To me, that's how you should do it.
Well, there's an interesting question from the audience, from Jody Thill. Which is because I think, if we're going to do this right, there are going to be some significant changes. But thinking about sustainability, if you're refreshing or changing or completely, revolutionizing the way you work, how do you balance that with the need for to not have too much the waste that comes with refreshing or changing or kind of, revamping office or home or other spaces? How do you do that, in a sustainable way?
I think one of the things that we're dreaming about is it's wasteful to see in all of our major cities, small cities, large cities, so many vacant spaces of viable retail, viable restaurant spaces that just the people aren't in the city anymore. They're not centralized. So for more than one restaurant to be open and to do enough turn of table to make it make sense to be open, they need people there. So it's really adapting. I think we're really looking at it more of like, how do we adapt what we already have to make it more sustainable for those business models, which will bring the people. It's not necessarily like a complete gut and remodel. We have, there's small things we can do to make it, there's small scale things we can do to make the spaces work better. But I think it's really about talking about the ideas of the uses of spaces from a human standpoint more than, a completely redesigned space. We know how to adapt things. So I guess I would play devil's advocate of what sustainability, with the footprint of that and the downstream effects of ignoring, the challenges that we're facing in our cities. We are all in Seattle, and it's the Seattle from 2 years ago is not the Seattle that's out those windows right there, and it is 100% because the people aren't back in the city. There's, one of the reasons to come into our office, or one of the things that we are hearing from all of our staff over and over again is there's no support business. There's one place to get coffee that's within a reasonable walking distance of our very expensive high-rise tower. And there's no food. There's nothing open. Lunch is non-existent. So, from a sustainability standpoint, all around us are just boarded up windows in a once thriving city. And I think that that's a travesty that we need to look at that as an issue too, because people need work, people need places to go and meet and congregate. And that's really kind of the heart of all of this is people coming back. And what are they coming back to?
Yeah, and if none of us go back to the office at all, is that's going to bring just sprawl? Are we not going to have like densified? How is that going to change things? And Kate and Stephanie, I wanted to let you both kind of weigh in on this to some extent, because I just want to make sure everybody gets equal time. What are your thoughts on that kind of balance between, obviously we need to change things, but there's also this sense that, we want to just sort of work with what we have versus starting from scratch.
Well, I saw, oh, go ahead. You go, Kate. Okay. I was just going to say there's a restaurant that was vacated by, this is just a good example, right? I'm working anecdotally here. that was vacated by another chef that was taken over and barely changed. I mean, the bones were good enough, and they put their mark on it and made it into a new restaurant. And that's the perfect way to do this and not have a bunch of waste. So there are ways, and I mean, I think the Pacific Northwest has a lot of good ideas around this subject. Yeah. Anyways, Kate.
That is an interesting point. Kind of rethinking what spaces you're going to use or reuse. It doesn't have to. Yeah, I like that. Sorry, Kate. I'll let you weigh in as well.
Oh, all good. I think we always like to think in terms of human behavior rather than trends, and the pandemic has accelerated. I think the changes that it's made on the way that we live has accelerated things, but I mean, it's only brought into more focus if you, particularly like we do all live in the Pacific Northwest, climate change is real, we're feeling it, the fires are crazy, the summers are crazy, these storms are insane. So we're seeing this as real. And I think that anyone who is resistant to accepting that that train has left the station. It's now very obvious. And I think looking at our emerging consumers, I mean, this next generation, they're serious about this. And so it's changing the way that we live. And so I think that that's always going to be baked into the way that we as hoteliers and hospitality people, and I'm sure that everyone who's involved in design and architecture here, like that's just table stakes to think about that, to be as responsible as possible, to try and be creative about solutions for that. I think that rethinking how we use these spaces is definitely, to Katie's point, a macro sustainability. I'm looking at, I think about ghost kitchens in shopping malls and how, malls of retail has changed, incredibly dramatically. Malls are perhaps not what they once were, and certainly not configured how they once were. And you're seeing ghost kitchens come in there, and people, being able to service food delivery and entrepreneurs, maybe they're not having to then outfit multiple small kitchens. I mean, that's a real sustainable solution to getting these businesses off the ground for these hospitality industry upstarts, like launching a new restaurant and doing it through carryout. So I think that there's creative ways to be sustainable on the macro level. And those buildings are not getting thrown away. We're not building, 15 small kitchens. And I think that there's some real, cost economies of scale there in the way that we do that. And the same with welcoming people back, being able to have hotels link with offices, and offices, really think about how do we get people down there and bring people down to these cities. I think that that's going to be beneficial for all of us. And so, yeah, I think it's all interconnected.
So that brings me to like one last question, which is like, who are the real, because this is like, in theory, these are excellent ideas. And I guess we all are, because of radical circumstances, being fairly radical. If you took a step back a few years ago, like this is a radical time. But who are, like, as we start to build new kind of spaces and really change this into a more, I don't want to say permanent because everything's going to be flexible, but into a new model, who are the innovators? There's a question here by Isis Copeland saying, do these changes need to be adopted by larger companies before the smaller firms will adopt? I wonder if it's even the opposite, if it's smaller companies and then the larger ones. Obviously, tech has been leading the way, at least before all this, as far as making a lot of the innovations that people are copying. Who do you see as the next, or is it just all of us now, or the next round of innovators?
I think it's going to be the people who are willing to take risks and leaps of faith of trusting humans to be grown-ups, like Kate said. And I think our kind of conversation really boils down to like the workplace. Maybe think about it more of like it's a social club that you're a part of, by being you're a member, by being an employee. So like, what are you offering that the other clubs don't have? Because everyone can have a computer and work forever.
Well, that's how you woo them back instead of lure them back.
Woo's better.
Woo is much better.
Woo.
I will now be saying woo.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two. I think I don't know whether it's small business or large business. I think I don't know, I think it's so cultural, and that comes from the leadership team, at least in my observations, in term, and you know, and doing that in collaboration with the people in the business. I think it's going to be fundamentally collaborative. In my opinion, those who will succeed and innovate will be those that don't mandate. They will, you know, they will co-create, in my opinion. But the second piece for me, you know, and again with my slightly boring B2B hat on, is that where I do see innovation happening that will fundamentally impact that is business models. Business models will impact that, because you know, in the old days when, you know, organizations talked about how resilient their business models were, they would plan for things like losing all their data. Now they need to plan for a pandemic and for goodness knows what else. And so organizations that are creating business models and architecting for them from the ground up and how they monetize that, I think we're going to see some really interesting do you know what I mean, in terms of how business monetizes their offerings. I can't even fathom what that's going to look like. I see in financial services in particular, some really exciting things happening in banking, which sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? But, you know, I can't believe actually I said those words out loud, but anyway, but I think net new business models are going to drive a lot of innovation in this space, as opposed to it being about size or any particular type of organization.
That's exciting to, I mean, I think it's exciting to think that we've been innovating so much, and the sort of path has been cleared for like a ton more innovation in this and other sectors, and hopefully that'll come to pass. I think some will, some won't, but in general, it seems like a very encouraging time that way. So
I would add, sorry.
No. Yeah, please. I was just going to ask who wants to add. So.
I would just add, in terms of innovation, I think our shared humanity is a very powerful thing, and connections are a very powerful thing. And I think that connection to humanity, it's a core to who we are as humans, to welcome and care for others. It's, you know, wandering through the desert to a village and finding people, and you invite them in and you give them food and shelter. That's how we went from, you know, wherever we started to be building communities and to really arts and all the amazing things we've done, technology as a people. So our shared humanity is where the innovation starts. So I think that connection, people who put the connection, and then I'll just say, I think a lot of this hospitality may be a starting point, because we in hospitality are allergic to the word no. You will figure out a way to make it happen. You ask us for something, you want something, you need something, we figure out a way to make it happen. Wellness comes into the hotel space, you know, these social spaces, that's the way that we think. So I think that that's where innovation will come, is thinking like a person who provides hospitality to your workers, to your clients, to your customers. I think that it really comes down to remembering our shared humanity and honoring that in our interactions with each other.
I want to again thank our sponsors, Versteel and Groa, who make this possible. B+H, of course, thank you for hosting. And most of all, I want to thank our panel. Everybody here was fantastic. Really a really interesting and kind of thought-provoking discussion that I think really I've written a lot of notes here that I'm going to go back to, because I think we're onto something. And I thank you all for taking all the time to chat. Really appreciate it.